A millionaire's wife had 30 days to live until the maid's miracle gave her new life. How could an ordinary maid, a woman with no money, no medical training, and no power, possibly achieve what the world's top doctors could not? What did she do that shocked everyone and changed fate itself? I've been studying extraordinary true life stories for years, and this one stands out as one of the most powerful tales of sacrifice, love, and miracles. I'll take you through every twist of this unbelievable story. By the end, you'll not only know what happened, but you'll also walk away with a powerful lesson that just might change how you see life, love, and hope itself. It all began in the glittering heart of New York City, where skyscrapers pierce the clouds and fortunes are made overnight. Among the elite few who sat at the top of this golden world was Alexander Grant, a self-made millionaire. To the outside world, his life was a picture-perfect dream. He had the mansion, the cars, the influence. He was the man people whispered about at cocktail parties, pointing to as living proof that the American dream still existed. And by his side was Isabella, his wife of 12 years. Isabella was known for her elegance and grace. Wherever she went, heads turned. But behind her refined smile, she was deeply human, a woman who had once been a teacher before marrying Alexander. Unlike the tabloids' cold descriptions of her as the millionaire's trophy, Isabella had warmth, kindness, and a quiet heart that longed for something simpler than champagne galas and velvet gowns. The Grant's mansion on the Upper East Side was enormous, filled with marble staircases and art worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. Yet, for all the grandeur, there was an emptiness in those long halls. Alexander worked long hours managing his empire, and Isabella, often left alone, filled her days with charity events, reading, and the quiet companionship of the household staff. Among them was Elena. Elena had come from another world entirely. She was a maid, hired 5 years earlier, quiet and diligent, rarely drawing her attention to herself. To most of the wealthy guests who entered the mansion, she was invisible, just another uniformed shadow moving silently through their golden evenings. But to Isabella, Elena was more than staff. She was a confidant, someone who listened when the rest of the world only judged. Over cups of tea in the quiet hours of morning, Isabella had found in Elena a gentle presence who never pretended, never played games. Life, though not perfect, felt secure. That illusion shattered one autumn morning. It started innocently. Isabella had been preparing for a charity luncheon. She laughed with Elena as she tried on a gown, adjusting her pearl necklace in the mirror. Then, suddenly, her hand dropped. Her face went pale, and she collapsed to the floor. Alexander was called instantly. An ambulance raced through the city streets. Within minutes, Isabella was wheeled into the sterile white corridors of New York Presbyterian Hospital. What began as confusion quickly spiraled into devastation. The doctors gathered Alexander into a quiet consultation room, their faces heavy with the kind of sympathy no husband ever wants to see. "Mr. Grant," one of them said gently, "your wife has a rare degenerative illness. It's aggressive. We've run the tests twice. I'm afraid she has no more than 30 days left." 30 days. Those two words hit Alexander harder than any financial loss, harder than any setback in his long career. He had fought his way to the top of the corporate world, turned bankrupt companies into empires, stared down ruthless competitors. But here, in this hospital, with sterile light buzzing above him, he was powerless. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere changed overnight. The ensuite, cheerful halls now echoed with silence. Isabella, once vibrant and alive, lay weak in bed, her energy fading with each day. Alexander hired the best specialists money could buy. Renowned doctors flew in from Europe. State-of-the-art machines were installed in their home. Every possible path was explored, but the diagnosis remained the same. Isabella had only 30 days. The wealthy friends who once had surrounded them began to fade away too, uncomfortable with tragedy. Family members murmured condolences but offered little else. Alexander, for all his millions, could only sit at Isabella's bedside at night, holding her frail hand, whispering promises he could not keep. And through it all, Elena remained. She moved quietly through Isabella's room, adjusting pillows, preparing soups she knew Isabella liked, reading to her when the nights grew too long. She saw what others did not, the loneliness, the fear, the way Isabella's once bright eyes dimmed with each sunrise. And though she said little, something was stirring inside her. Unlike Alexander, who attacked the problem with money and influence, Elena felt the weight of Isabella's humanity. She had seen sickness before, though not like this. In her village far away, her grandmother had been a healer. As a child, Elena had gathered herbs from the hills, learned chants and remedies passed down through generations. But those memories belonged to another life, one she had left behind when she came to the city to work. Still, as she watched Isabella fade, those old lessons whispered to her. On the 20th night, when Isabella could barely lift a spoon to her lips, Elena lingered by her bedside longer than usual. She hesitated, then bent close and whispered words she had never dared speak before. "Don't give up yet, Signora. Sometimes the light comes when we least expect it." Isabella, too weak to answer, only squeezed her hand, but in that squeeze was trust. Outside the bedroom door, Alexander stood in the hallway, his face pale, his fists clenched. He had overheard Elena's words, and, though he said nothing, his jaw tightened. He didn't want false hope, not now, when science had spoken its cruel truth. Yet, deep inside, he too felt the imperishable weight of 30 days ticking away, like sand slipping through an hourglass. And so, the stage was set. A millionaire, powerless despite all his fortune. A wife, fading despite all the doctors in the world. And a maid, carrying within her a hidden knowledge that no one could have imagined would one day challenge fate itself. The story you are about to hear unfolds in those desperate 30 days, a countdown where every hour mattered, every decision changed everything, and where a miracle was born in the most unlikely of places.
The sound of a ticking clock can be the most haunting thing in the world, especially when every tick is a reminder that someone you love is running out of time. For Alexander and Isabella Grant, each passing day after the diagnosis was a cruel countdown. The words 30 days hung over the mansion like a dark cloud, suffocating every corner, every conversation, every heartbeat. Doctors filled the house like an army. Renowned specialists from London, Berlin, and Tokyo walked through the marble halls with expensive briefcases and hushed voices. Machines worth millions hummed and beeped in Isabella's bedroom, but no matter how advanced the technology, no matter how prestigious the name, the verdict remained the same. Nothing could be done. Alexander paced the corridors like a man possessed. He had made fortunes by solving the unsolvable, by outsmarting rivals, by finding loopholes in impossible contracts. But here he was, staring at charts filled with medical jargon he couldn't decipher, listening to doctors who shrugged their shoulders and offered sympathy instead of solutions. For Isabella, the weight was even heavier. She had always been a woman of quiet strength, but now, confined to her bed, she felt herself slipping away with each sunrise. Her hands trembled, her voice grew faint, her laughter disappeared. Once she had filled the mansion with music from the piano in the East Wing. Now the only sounds were the beeping monitors and the quiet shuffling of nurses. And yet, through it all, Elena remained by her side. The other staff whispered about her. Why does she spend so much time in the mistress's room? Isn't it too painful to watch? But Elena ignored them. She fluffed Isabella's pillows, cooled her fevered head with a damp cloth, and read to her from the novels she loved. Sometimes Isabella would drift in and out of sleep, her eyes fluttering, but Elena's voice never wavered. One night, when the rest of the house was silent, Isabella turned her head weakly toward Elena. Her lips barely moved, but the words were clear. Do you think I'll see another spring?" Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to lie, to give comfort. But instead, she squeezed Isabella's hand and whispered, "I think miracles happen in ways we don't expect. Hold on, Signora. Hold on a little longer." Outside the door, Alexander overheard again. His heart ached at the sound of his wife's question. He wanted to storm in, to demand Elena stop filling Isabella's mind with hope. But something in him froze, because the truth was, he wanted to believe too. Still, the weight of reality crushed him. One morning, a new specialist arrived, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of practice. The household staff whispered that he was the best in the world. Alexander pinned his last hopes on this man. Hours later, in the drawing room, the doctor delivered his verdict. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. The disease is progressing faster than expected. I don't think she'll last the full 30 days. The words hit like a hammer. Alexander dismissed the doctor, then collapsed into a leather chair, burying his face in his hands. For a man who had never accepted defeat in his life, this felt like drowning. Meanwhile, Isabella's world grew smaller. She no longer walked the halls of the mansion. Her world was reduced to her bed, the view of the city skyline through the window, and the soft footsteps of Elena moving around her. Friends stopped visiting. It was too painful, too awkward. Family sent flowers, but rarely came. Isabella once whispered bitterly to Elena, "When you're rich, the world wants to share your joy. But when you're dying, they vanish like smoke." Elena said nothing, but the truth of those words pierced her heart. For Alexander, the pressure mounted. He began offering bribes, millions to any doctor who could find a cure, bonuses larger than most people's life savings if someone could extend Isabella's life even by a month. But science didn't bend to money, not this time. At night, when the mansion grew silent, Alexander sat alone in his study, staring at photographs of their wedding day. Isabella in her white dress, smiling brighter than the sun, and him, a younger man, with no idea of the storm life would one day bring. He would press the photo to his chest and whisper, "Please, don't leave me." And then there was Elena. Her own memories began to surface more strongly now. She remembered the voice of her grandmother back in the small village where she grew up. The old woman had been known for her healing hands. People traveled miles for her herbal teas, her poultices, her whispered prayers. As a child, she had gathered herbs, learned the secrets of roots and leaves. She had seen fevers broken, infections healed, pain soothed, not with machines, but with the earth itself. In the city, Elena had buried those memories. People here didn't believe in such things. They called it superstition. And so she became a maid, silent, invisible. But now, watching Isabella fade, those old lessons clawed at her heart. Could it be possible? Could something she remembered, something natural, something hidden, succeed where doctors had failed? She stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her small servants' quarters, torn between fear and courage. What if I try and fail? What if I give her false hope? What if Alexander fires me for even suggesting it? But then another thought haunted her even more. What if I do nothing and she dies? The 20-day mark came. Isabella had only 10 days left according to the doctors. She was now so weak she could barely sit upright. Alexander spent every hour by her side, his eyes bloodshot, his face drawn. The mansion was a tomb. Every clock seemed louder. Every sunrise felt like a thief stealing more time. That night, Elena finally made a decision. She would try. Even if it cost her job, even if it brought ridicule, even if it changed nothing, she couldn't just stand by and watch Isabella slip away. Quietly, she began gathering ingredients. Herbs she had hidden away, teas she remembered from childhood, whispered prayers passed down through her grandmother's lips. It wasn't medicine in the eyes of the world, but to Elena, it was hope.
And hope was exactly what the Grants had run out of. The first steps of her plan were quiet, almost invisible. She brewed teas at night, hid them in simple cups, and gently offered them to Isabella. She massaged her hands with oils, whispered encouragements, prayed silently when no one watched. For the first time in weeks, Isabella's eyes seemed to flicker with a spark. She held Elena's hand longer. She whispered, "Thank you." But hope is a dangerous thing in a house drowning in despair, because soon Alexander would discover what Elena was doing, and his reaction would decide everything.
The night was silent in the Grant mansion, but Elena's heart raced like a storm. She sat on the edge of her narrow servant's bed, staring at the flickering light of a candle. On the nightstand beside her were scattered herbs in small bottles she had carefully hidden from the other staff. Her hands trembled as she touched them. It had been years since she dared to use these things. Years since she had remembered what she was truly capable of. Elena was not always a maid. She grew up in a small mountain village in South America, far away from the glittering towers of New York. Life there was harsh, simple, but deeply rooted in traditions that city people would call old magic. Her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had been the village healer, not by profession, but by gift. People came from neighboring valleys to seek her help. Mothers brought feverish children. Farmers came with twisted ankles. Elders came when their pain grew unbearable. Rosa never turned anyone away. She would take Elena by the hand, lead her into the hills, and teach her the language of the earth. "This plant," she would whisper, pointing to a small green sprout pushing through the soil, "calms the heart when fear tries to steal it. This root," she would dig carefully, "is bitter, but it can pull poison from the blood. And these prayers," she would close her eyes and chant softly, "remind us that healing is not only of the body, but of the soul." As a child, Elena had followed eagerly, memorizing everything. Her pockets were often full of dried leaves, her skirts stained with mud from the hills. She learned to brew teas, to grind herbs, to listen to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. And though the villagers sometimes called her Little Healer, Elena never saw herself as special. She was just helping her grandmother, just doing what needed to be done. But when she grew older, tragedy struck. A fever swept through their village one winter, and her grandmother, the strong, unshakable Rosa, fell ill. Elena tried everything she knew, every herb, every prayer. But Rosa whispered with her last breath, "You must go, child. The city will give you work, and someday someone will need what you carry inside. Don't forget who you are." Elena left the village with nothing but those words and the knowledge in her heart. The city was cold, loud, and unforgiving. She was just another poor girl looking for work. No one cared about her grandmother's remedies here. People laughed when she mentioned herbs, called her superstitious, dismissed her with a wave of the hand. So she buried that part of herself. She became what the city wanted her to be, invisible. A servant, a maid, a pair of quiet hands cleaning marble floors in a millionaire's mansion. For years she kept that past locked away, until Isabella. Now, as she sat in her small room staring at the herbs spread before her, Elena felt her grandmother's voice whisper again, "Someday, someone will need what you carry inside." That someday had arrived. The next morning, Elena entered Isabella's room with a small cup of tea, different from the ones the nurses usually brought. Isabella, pale and weak, lifted her eyes to Elena. "What's this?" she asked softly. "A tea my grandmother taught me to make. Elena said carefully. "It may help you rest easier." Isabella hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I trust you, Elena, more than the strangers with their machines." She sipped. The taste was bitter, but soothing. That night, for the first time in weeks, Isabella slept without pain. When Alexander noticed, suspicion filled his eyes. "What did you give her?" he demanded. "A tea," Elena answered calmly. "Harmless, just to comfort her." Alexander frowned. "I don't want superstitions or folk remedies giving her false hope. The doctors know what they're doing, you don't." Elena lowered her gaze, but inside, her resolution hardened. She wanted to say, "The doctors have already given up. I haven't." But she bit her tongue. She couldn't risk being thrown out, not when Isabella still needed her. Days passed. Elena continued her quiet work. Teas, oils, whispered prayers. Small things, but each one done with faith. And slowly, Isabella's condition shifted. Her color returned slightly. Her voice grew a little stronger. She even managed to laugh one afternoon when Elena told her a story from her village. But recovery was never a straight line. One evening, Isabella suddenly began to cough violently, her body racked with pain. The doctors rushed in, shaking their heads gravely. Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, helpless, fury boiling inside him. "This is what happens when you play games with her health," he shouted at Elena later, his voice echoing through the halls. "You're a maid, nothing more. Stay in your place." The words cut deep. Elena stood in silence, tears burning in her eyes. But Isabella, from her bed, whispered weakly, "No, Alexander, let her stay. She gives me hope, and that is something your doctors cannot." The room fell into silence. Alexander looked at his wife, at the love of his life clinging desperately to a thread of hope. His shoulders sagged. He turned away, defeated. And in that moment, Elena knew she could no longer hide. That night, she sat beside Isabella and told her everything. About her grandmother, about the herbs, the prayers, the healing traditions of her village, about the knowledge she had buried for years. Isabella listened with wide eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Isabella whispered. "Because," Elena admitted, "I was afraid no one would believe me, afraid I would fail." Isabella took her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Elena, you are the only one who has not failed me. Please, do whatever you must." Those words changed everything. Elena was no longer just a maid. She was now Isabella's last hope. And so, the maid with a hidden past prepared to face a battle larger than anything she had imagined. Not against enemies she could see, not against rivals or poverty, but against time itself. 10 days remained. 10 days before the doctor's prediction became truth. 10 days for Elena to find the courage to use everything she knew, everything she had buried, to perform what the world would one day call a miracle.
The Grant mansion no longer felt like a home. Its chandeliers sparkled above empty halls. Its marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps of nurses and doctors who came and went with heavy faces. But for Alexander and Isabella, those towering walls had become a prison, a place where every clock ticked louder, marking the approach of the inevitable. And then there was Elena. She moved through those halls with quiet determination. To the other staff, she was just doing her job, but in truth, Every step, every whispered prayer, every cup of tea she brewed was part of a secret mission. The doctors had given Isabella 10 days. 10. A number so small it haunted Elena's dreams at night. She woke at dawn, palms sweaty, hearing her grandmother's voice in her mind. The earth holds more than men will ever know. Use it. Trust it. Trust yourself. And so, Elena decided she could no longer hold back. That morning, as the first light broke over the city skyline, she brought Isabella a drink. It wasn't the bitter tea this time. It was something new. A blend of herbs she had never dared use before. Isabella looked at the cup, then at Elena. "Is this safe?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from nights of pain. Elena's eyes softened. "It is safe, Señora. My grandmother used it for those who had no more hope. It may not cure everything, but it may give your body the strength to fight a little longer." Isabella held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with trembling hands, she lifted the cup and drank. The taste was sharp, almost burning, but she did not flinch. She trusted Elena more than the doctors who spoke of death as if it were a scheduled appointment. By noon, Alexander returned from a meeting with yet another specialist. His face was pale, jaw tight, as though he had been carrying the weight of the world. "How is she?" he asked a nurse in the hallway. "Stable," the nurse said cautiously, "but weak, very weak." He entered Isabella's room, expecting silence. Instead, he found her propped slightly against her pillows, talking faintly with Elena. Her cheeks had a touch more color, her voice a little more strength. "What's going on?" Alexander demanded, his eyes narrowed at the empty cup on the nightstand. Elena stepped forward calmly. "I gave her a tea. It is not dangerous. It helps her body rest." Alexander's fists clenched. "Tea? You think tea is gonna fix what the world's best doctors cannot? Stop filling her head with nonsense. Do you want to kill her faster?" The words cut through the room like a knife. Isabella turned weakly toward her husband. "Alex," she whispered. "Don't. Please, let her try." Alexander froze. The desperation in her wife's eyes stopped him. He wanted to shout, to forbid this madness, but when he looked at Isabella, her fragile body, her trembling lips, her hope resting entirely on Elena, something inside him shattered. He lowered his voice. "If you trust her, then I'll allow it. But if anything happens to you, Isabella," his eyes darted to Elena, sharp and full of warning, "she will answer to me." Elena bowed her head. "I understand." But inside, she did not flinch. She had made her choice. From that day forward, Elena devoted herself fully. She brewed teas morning and night. She massaged Isabella's hands and feet with oils from herbs she had kept hidden for years. She prayed softly as she worked, her lips moving silently as she remembered her grandmother's chants. And something remarkable began to happen. The pain that had tormented Isabella lessened slightly. She could rest longer without waking in agony. She ate a little more. Her voice grew stronger. The shadows under her eyes lightened. Even the nurses whispered among themselves, "She looks better. Just a little, but better." The doctors dismissed it as a coincidence. Temporary stabilization, they called it. Nothing more. But to Isabella, it was life. One evening, she reached out and took Elena's hand. You've given me something no one else could, she whispered. What is that, Signora? Elena asked softly. Hope, Isabella said simply, tears shining in her eyes. But the path to healing is never straight. On the 6th day, Isabella suffered a sudden relapse. Pain tore through her body, and she collapsed in a fit of coughing so violent Alexander thought she might die right then. Doctors rushed in, machines beeped wildly, and Alexander turned on Elena with fury. This is because of you, he roared, grabbing her arm. Your witchcraft, your nonsense, you've poisoned her. Elena did not fight back. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. I would never harm her. Everything I do is to help her. Help her? Alexander snapped. You're a maid. You don't know anything. But Isadana, gasping for breath, managed to lift her hand weakly. Her voice was barely audible, but it cut through the chaos. Stop! Alex! Let her stay! The room went silent. Even the doctors paused. Alexander looked at his wife, then at the maid, then back at his wife. His chest heaved with anger and helplessness. Finally, he released Elena's arm and turned away. But in that moment, his respect for her, though buried under pride and fear, began to take root. That night, Elena sat alone in the darkened kitchen, head bowed, hands clasped. She felt the weight of failure pressing on her chest. The herbs had not been enough. Isabella's body was fighting, but the illness was stronger. And then she remembered something her grandmother once said. When the mountain blocks your path, you do not stop. You climb higher. The answer is always further than you think. Elena's eyes widened. She knew what she had to do. The remedies she had used were powerful, but there was one she had never attempted on her own. A rare herb from her homeland, known to strengthen even the weakest of hearts. But it was far away, beyond the city, beyond her reach, unless she risked everything to get it. She pressed her hands together and whispered into the darkness, Abuela, guide me. I cannot let her die. The mansion slept, unaware of the decision forming in Elena's heart. Alexander sat by his wife's bedside, clutching her hand, whispering prayers he never thought he'd say. Isabella drifted between sleep and pain, her breaths shallow. And in her small room downstairs, Elena packed a tiny bag with only what she needed. Clothes, a few coins she had saved, and the memory of a recipe that might change everything. It was a gamble, a desperate gamble against time itself. 10 days had become 6. Soon, 6 would become none. And so, as the city lights flickered outside the mansion windows, a maid prepared to leave behind the safety of silence, to chase a miracle no one believed in. The following days unfolded like a storm that refused to settle. At first, there were whispers of change, so faint the doctors dismissed them as illusions. But to Isabella and to Elena, who sat faithfully at her side, they were sparks of light breaking through endless night. One morning, Isabella awoke without the stabbing pain that usually greeted her. Her breathing was easier, her body lighter. For the first time in weeks, she was able to sit upright without help. Elena, she whispered, her hand brushing against the maid's. I feel different. Not cured, but as though my body remembers what it means to fight again.
Elena's eyes shone with quiet joy. Then we will keep going, Signora, one step at a time. When Alexander entered the room later that day, he froze. Isabella was sitting up against her pillows, sunlight falling across her face. She looked frail, yes, but alive in a way he hadn't seen in weeks. His voice caught in his throat. He moved closer, almost afraid to break the moment. You're smiling. Isabella reached for his hand. I'm still here, Alex. He turned his gaze to Elena, suspicion still written across his features, but mingled now with something new, reluctant hope. What have you been giving her? Elena straightened her shoulders. Herbs to strengthen her body, oils to ease her pain, food her stomach can keep, and prayers, Signor, many prayers. Alexander scoffed softly, though not unkindly. Prayers. He shook his head, but his eyes lingered on Isabella, drinking in the sight of her. For the first time he dared to believe she might not slip away just yet. In the following days, Isabella grew stronger. She laughed faintly at one of Alexander's old jokes. She walked, only a few steps, clinging to Elena's arm, but still, she walked. The nurses marveled, whispering in hallways, "It's impossible. No one comes back from this." The doctors frowned, flipping through charts and test results. Temporary, they insisted. The disease always wins. But in Isabella's heart, something powerful had taken root. Hope. One evening, she sat with Elena near the large bay window overlooking the gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and pink. You know, Signora, I used to think this house had everything. Beauty, wealth, power. But it was empty. Until now. Empty, Signora? Yes. Isabella nodded, because I mistook comfort for life. But life is here, in the fight, in the breath, in the hands that reach out to help when you expect nothing in return. She squeezed Elena's hand. You gave me life, Elena. No matter what happens next, you gave me back the will to live. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but before she could answer, Alexander appeared in the doorway. He had been listening. His face softened, his pride cracking under the weight of his wife's gratitude for the woman he once saw as insignificant. He cleared his throat. Dinner is ready. His voice was rough, but his eyes were warm. For a few fleeting days, joy returned to the mansion. The staff smiled more. Alexander spent long hours with Isabella, cherishing every word she spoke. Even the doctors, though skeptical, admitted her improvement was remarkable. But hope is fragile, and sometimes it breaks when you least expect it. On the 9th night, Isabella woke screaming, her body writhing in pain, her hands clutching her chest. The monitors beside her bed blared, nurses rushed in, and Alexander's world collapsed once again. Elena, he bellowed, grabbing the maid by the arm. What have you done to her? Elena's face drained of color. Nothing new, Signor. I gave her the same remedies. I swear it. Then why is this happening? Alexander's voice cracked, filled with anguish. He turned to the doctors. Save her! Do something! But the doctors only shook their heads, helpless. Her condition is progressing. This was inevitable. Isabella gasped for breath, tears streaming down her face. Alex, please, don't blame her. This isn't her fault. Alexander's chest heaved. He looked at his wife. at the woman he loved more than life itself, suffering before his eyes. Then at Elena, whose eyes brimmed with desperate sorrow but unwavering resolution. For the first time he saw her not as a servant, not as a foolish girl chasing dreams, but as a warrior standing in the fire, refusing to let it consume the one she cared for. He released her arms slowly, his voice raw. "If you know something more, anything, now is the time. I'll give you whatever you need, just save her." Elena swallowed hard. This was the moment she had feared and prayed for. "There is one more remedy, but it is not here. It grows only in the mountains of my homeland. It is rare and dangerous to find, but if I can bring it back, it may give her the strength that she needs." Alexander's eyes widened. "Then go! I'll send men, resources." Elena shook her head. "They would not find it. Only I know where to look. Only I know how to prepare it." "You can't just leave her now," Alexander said sharply. "What if—" Elena interrupted gently. "I must. If I stay, she dies. If I go, she has a chance." Alexander's jaw clenched. He wanted to forbid it, to protect his wife from false hope once again. But the desperation in Isabella's eyes silenced him. "Alex," she whispered, "let her try." He looked at his wife, her skin pale, her breaths shallow, but her spirit still burning. Finally, he nodded. "Go. Do whatever it takes." That night, Elena packed a small bundle, warm clothes, a few coins, a vial of oil to protect the herb once she found it, and tucked close to her heart the memory of her grandmother's voice guiding her through the forests and mountains she had once called home. Before dawn, she stood at Isabella's bedside one last time. The woman was asleep, her face peaceful despite the storm inside her body. Elena bent down and whispered, "Hold on, Senora. I will return. You are not alone." Alexander watched silently from the doorway, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he offered her a nod, not of authority, but of trust. And with that, Elena stepped into the night, leaving behind the grand mansion and everything she knew. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and filled with danger, but her heart carried only one thought, one mission, one prayer. Bring back the miracle before time runs out.
The mansion felt hollow without Elena's presence. The halls that once echoed with her quiet footsteps now rang with silence. Isabella lingered between wakefulness and dreams, her body fragile, her spirit flickering. Alexander sat by her side, torn between fear and reluctant faith, knowing that at this very moment, the maid he once dismissed was carrying the weight of their future. Meanwhile, far from the gleam of marble floors and polished chandeliers, Elena began her journey. The road stretched endlessly before her. With only a small satchel slung over her shoulder, she boarded a worn bus that rattled out of the city and into the countryside. The skyscrapers gave way to rolling fields, then to the jagged outlines of mountains that clawed at the sky. Her heart pounded with every passing mile. She had not been back to her homeland in years. Memories surged, her grandmother's weathered hands crushing herbs into powder, her laughter echoing through the small clay house, the earthy smell of soil after rain. One day, her grandmother used to say, "These mountains will call you back, not for yourself, but for someone who needs you." That day had come. The bus dropped her at the foot of a valley. From there, Elena walked,
Her shoes sunk into mud. Her breath quickened as the air grew thin. The nights were cold, the stars sharp against the black sky. By the third day, her body ached. Her hands blistered from gripping rocks, her feet raw from endless climbing. She drank from rivers, ate berries she recognized from childhood teachings, but hunger gnawed at her, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. Still she pressed on. Every time doubt whispered, she heard Isabella's voice, "You gave me hope." On the fourth day, Elena reached her grandmother's village, a scattering of old stone houses nestled between mountains. The people greeted her with warmth, though their eyes showed curiosity. "Elena, you've returned? After all these years?" She bowed respectfully. "I need your help. I need the herb of the silver leaf." At the mention of the name, silence fell. An old woman stepped forward, her face lined like cracked earth. "That plant is rare. It grows only on the cliffs beyond the sacred falls. Many have searched for it. Few return." "I must find it," Elena said firmly. "A life depends on it." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. One man muttered, "Better to let the dying rest than chase death yourself." But Elena lifted her chin, her eyes fierce. "No, I will not let her rest. Not yet. Not while there is a chance." The old woman sighed, then placed a small bundle in her hands, a pouch of dried roots, a cloth for wounds. "Then go with blessings, child, and may the mountains show mercy." The journey grew treacherous. She followed the sound of rushing water, climbing higher until she reached the sacred falls. Water thundered down the cliffside, mist rising like ghostly smoke. And there, clinging to the edges of the rock face, were flashes of silver-green leaves glistening in the spray. Her breath caught. She had found it. But the path was deadly. The cliff was steep, the rocks slick with water. One misstep and she would fall into the churning river below. She tied the cloth around her waist, whispered a prayer, and began to climb. Every step was a battle. Her hands bled as sharp rocks cut into her skin. Her feet slipped more than once, sending stones tumbling into the roar beneath her. Her heart thundered with fear, but she clung tighter, inching upward. At last, her fingers brushed the silver leaves. She reached out, grasping them, and pulled. The stems resisted, their roots gripping the stone as if alive. With one final tug, she tore free a bundle, cradling it to her chest. "Gracias a Dios," she gasped, tears mixing with the spray of the waterfall. But as she turned to descend, her foot slipped. She fell. Her body crashed against rock, pain exploding in her side. She managed to cling to a ledge, the bundle still clutched in her arms. For a long, terrifying moment, she dangled above the abyss, her strength fading. "Elena," she whispered to herself, "you cannot let go. Not now. Not when she is waiting." With a cry that tore from the depths of her soul, she pulled herself up, inch by inch, until she found solid ground. She collapsed on the rocks, the precious leaves still safe in her hands. Her vision blurred, her body bruised and battered, but she was alive, and so was hope. The journey back was slower. Her ribs ached with every breath. Her body demanded rest she could not afford, but she pressed forward, fueled by the image of Isabella's face, pale, fading, yet light with trust. When she finally reached the bus that would take her back to the city, her body trembled with exhaustion, yet she held the herb as if it were a newborn child, guarding it with every ounce of her strength. As the city skyline came into view once more, Elena whispered, "Hold on, Senora, I am coming." Back at the mansion, time had turned cruel. Isabella's condition worsened. The doctors shook their heads gravely. "It will be hours, perhaps a day at most." Alexander refused to leave her side, his eyes red from sleepless nights.
He held her hand, whispering, "Don't go. Please don't go." Isabella smiled faintly, her voice weak. "You must let me, if it is my time." "No," Alexander said fiercely. "I won't. I can't." And then the door burst open. "Elena!" Isabella gasped, her eyes lighting with a spark of recognition. The maid stumbled inside, torn and battered, her clothes stained, her hair damp with sweat. In her trembling hands, she held out the bundle of silver-green leaves. "I found it," she whispered hoarsely. "I brought the miracle."
The room fell silent as Elena staggered through the doorway. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised, her face pale with exhaustion. Yet in her trembling hands, she cradled a bundle of silver-green leaves, like treasure pulled from heaven itself. Alexander rose to his feet instantly. You came back." Elena's knees nearly buckled, but she held the herb high. "For her," she whispered, "only for her." Isabella's eyes glistened with tears as she stretched out a weak hand. "Elena!" The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, whispering in low voices. "What is this? A plant? We cannot risk." But Alexander cut them off with a shout. "Enough! You've done nothing but count down her days. She trusted Elena, and now so will I." His voice croaked between fury and hope. "Do it. Whatever must be done, do it." Elena nodded, sinking into the chair beside the bed. Her hands shook as she pulled a small knife from her satchel, slicing the leaves carefully, crushing them against a stone she carried for the purpose. The room filled with a sharp, earthy scent, tinged with something metallic, something ancient. She whispered as she worked, chants her grandmother had once murmured under the stars. Words of healing, words of protection. Her lips moved steadily, though her voice trembled. Finally, she held out the mixture, a dark green liquid in a small clay cup. "Señora," she said softly, "this is the moment. Drink and let your body fight." Isabella stared at the cup, her eyes filled with both fear and fragile hope. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but Alexander was already there, holding the cup with her, steadying her hand. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Isabella smiled faintly. "If I must choose between waiting for death and reaching for life, I choose life." With trembling lips, she drank. The liquid was bitter, sharp, and it burned her throat as it went down. Isabella coughed violently, her body convulsing, and for a terrifying moment, Alexander thought it had killed her. He leapt forward, shouting, "Elena, what have you done?" But Elena's hands shot up. "Wait. Give it time." The room froze, every heartbeat pounding like thunder. Minutes passed like hours. Isabella's breathing grew ragged, then stilled to shallow gasps. Her skin turned pale, almost translucent. Nurses rushed in with equipment, but Alexander waved them back, his eyes locked on his wife. "Please, God," he whispered, clutching her hand. "Please don't take her." And then it happened. Her chest rose deeper than before, fuller. A flush of color spread slowly across her cheeks. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. "Alex," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but it carried strength beneath it, a strength that had been missing for so long. Alexander's breath caught. "Isabella?" She squeezed his hand. I feel alive." Tears streamed down Alexander's face. He turned to Elena, his pride shattering completely. You've done it. You've saved her." Elena shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, she saved herself. I only gave her a chance. She chose to live." The doctors, stunned, rushed forward with their machines and instruments, checking vitals, scanning monitors. Their faces, once resigned to failure, now flickered with disbelief. Her heart rate steady, blood pressure normalizing. This is impossible. But Isabella only smiled, closing her eyes in relief. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't sinking into darkness, but rising toward light. The days that followed were nothing short of astonishing. Each morning, Isabella grew stronger. She walked more steps. She laughed more often. Food no longer poisoned her body, it nourished her. Her skin glowed with returning health, and her eyes sparkled with life. The nurses whispered in awe. She should have been gone days ago, and yet look at her. The doctors held conferences, debating, scratching their heads. We have no explanation. Medical science cannot account for this recovery. But Alexander didn't care about their theories. He cared only that his wife was alive, alive because of a maid he had once underestimated. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Alexander found Elena in the garden, kneeling beside the flowers she often tended in quiet hours. He stood silently for a moment, then said softly, "I owe you an apology." Elena turned, startled. "Signor, you owe me nothing." "I owe you everything," Alexander corrected, his voice breaking. "I judged you, I doubted you, and yet when everyone else gave up, you risked your life for her, for us. Money, power, medicine, none of it could save her. But you gave me back my wife." Elena bowed her head, tears welling. "I only did what love demanded. She was kind to me, more than anyone else ever was. I could not stand by and watch her fade." Alexander placed a hand over his heart. "From this day forward, you are no longer a maid in this house. You are family." Inside, Isabella sat by the window, watching the stars. When Elena returned, she beckoned her close. "Elena," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months, "when the doctors spoke of death, I was ready to surrender. But you refused to let me go. You saw life in me when I could not see it myself." Elena knelt beside her. "You gave me strength too, Signora. You trusted me when no one else would." Their hands clasped, their bond now deeper than servant and mistress, deeper even than friendship. They were sisters of the soul, bound by the miracle they had created together. And so the 30 days came and went. Instead of mourning, the Grant mansion celebrated life. Laughter filled its halls once more, music drifted from its rooms, and hope settled into every corner. But for Alexander, Isabella, and Elena, the miracle was not only survival, it was transformation. Isabella had been given back her days. Alexander had been humbled, taught that money could not command life, and Elena had proven that the humblest heart, the quietest hands, could hold the power to change destiny itself.
The 30 days passed, not with mourning, not with sorrow, but with laughter, music, and the warmth of a second chance. The Grant mansion, once a place of shadows and whispered despair, glowed with life again. The chandeliers lit not hollow halls, but gatherings of family and friends. Isabella walked those corridors on her own 2 feet, her smile radiant, her spirit shining brighter than ever. For the world outside, her survival was a mystery. Doctors debated in medical journals, specialists called it an anomaly. Reporters clamored for details, but the Grants remained silent, guarding the truth of the miracle within their walls. Only 3 people knew the full story: Alexander, Isabella, and Elena. One evening, weeks after the miracle, Isabella sat in the garden beneath a blanket of stars. The scent of roses filled the air, and the gentle hum of cicadas reminded her of life's delicate rhythm. Elena sat beside her, trimming herbs she had planted anew in the soil, the very herbs that had helped keep Isabella alive. Alexander joined them. His usually stern face softened, his posture no longer weighed down by grief. He looked at his wife,
then at Elena, and smiled, a smile of gratitude, of humility. I used to believe, Alexander began quietly, that wealth could solve everything, that there was no problem too great, no door too firmly shut that money could not open. But in these past weeks, I learned something wealth could never buy: faith, sacrifice, love. He turned to Elena. You taught me that. Elena lowered her gaze, embarrassed. I only did what anyone would have done, Signor. No, Alexander said firmly, not anyone. Most would have given up. Most would have walked away. But you, his voice cracked, you climbed mountains, bled for us, risked everything for no reward. A tear slid down Isabella's cheek as she took Elena's hand. You gave me back my life, and not just my life, my hope, my joy, my marriage. You saved us all, Elena. Elena's lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. She had never been praised like this, never been seen as more than a servant. Yet here, in this moment, she was family. In the months that followed, Isabella grew stronger. She no longer lived under the shadow of a ticking clock, but embraced each day as a gift. She traveled with Alexander, laughed with friends, and worked quietly with Elena to create a small foundation for those who could not afford care. Together, they called it La Luz, the light. The foundation funded research into natural remedies, provided aid to poor families, and taught that healing was more than medicine. It was hope, compassion, and courage. Elena became its heart, sharing her grandmother's wisdom, guiding patients, and inspiring countless others with her story. But the miracle was not just for Isabella. It changed Alexander too. The proud, untouchable millionaire who once measured his worth in numbers now measured it in moments. A sunrise shared with his wife, a smile from the maid he now called his sister, the laughter of children healed through their foundation. He often told people, I had everything and nothing, until I learned that the greatest treasure is not money, but the life we save when we refuse to give up. And as for Elena, she remained humble, never seeking recognition. She lived simply, still working in the mansion, but with a new dignity. Servant no longer, she was a guardian of life, a symbol of hope. Sometimes she would stand by the window at night, gazing at the stars, and whisper to her grandmother's memory, Abuela, I did as you taught me. I climbed higher. I found the answer. And in her heart, she felt her grandmother's spirit smile back. Years passed. Isabella lived long beyond the 30 days she had been given. She and Alexander grew old together, cherishing each sunrise, each laugh, each touch of the hand. Elena was always by their side, not as an employee, but as family. And when people asked Isabella about her recovery, she never spoke of miracles in grand, untouchable terms. She always said the same simple truth. My miracle came in the hands of a woman who refused to give up on me. Sometimes angels don't come with wings. Sometimes they come as maids.